My name is John. I am a trucker who has spent most of my life on the road. Every day I travel thousands of miles, passing through deserts, mountains, cities where no one knows my name. I was never afraid. The road is my home, my refuge. But one night changed everything. This happened a few weeks ago when I received an order for a shipment from Seattle to New Orleans. Nothing special, just another flight. But this route ran through a godforsaken stretch of road that drivers avoided like fire. I've heard stories about this track like everyone else. It was said that people disappeared here without leaving any traces. But I did not believe in such fables. So I decided to take a shorter route. It was about 3 in the morning when I realized something was wrong. My navigator, which had always worked perfectly, suddenly started behaving strangely. First he lost the signal, then he began to point in unclear directions, forcing me back into the pitch black. I pulled over to the side of the road to check the map and figure out where I was. At that moment I saw him. He was standing right on the edge of the road, a man in a hat, too tall, with a thin figure that looked unnaturally long. His face was hidden in the shadows, but I could feel his gaze on me. It wasn't just a look. It was like a blow that penetrated the very heart. I thought I heard his breathing. Slow, heavy, hoarse. And here, in the midst of this silence, I heard a voice. Not his voice, but something inside me. "Get out of here," it whispered, "while you still can." But I couldn't move, as if someone was holding me. My engine stalled and I couldn't start it, like the truck was dead. And that man stood and did not move. And then I realized that I had made a huge mistake. I kept looking at him, trying to figure out what he was going to do. And then I noticed that his arms were unnaturally long, ending only a few centimeters above the ground. I felt a cold sweat on my back as he began to slowly walk towards me. Each of his steps echoed loudly in my head, like the blows of a hammer. I grabbed the walkie-talkie, trying to call for help, only to hear a static spike. The feeling of desperation grew with each passing second. I could see him approaching, his face still hidden by his hat. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out, as if some invisible fear was tightening his throat. Finally, the engine fired up and I hit the gas without looking back. I moved as fast as I could and still heard his footsteps behind me. I saw him standing in the middle of the road in the rearview mirror, and then he was gone. In one moment, as if he was not there. I tried to breathe evenly, gripping the steering wheel so hard that my fingers turned white. I was haunted by this image. His unnaturally long arms, this look that I had not even seen. But silence scared me even more. Silence in my cab, silence on the road that grew in my head. It wasn't just the silence of the night, it was a silence that wanted to consume me. I drove a few more miles when I noticed a faint light in the distance. Motel. Finally, a place where you can catch your breath and stop at least for a minute. I pulled into park and shut off the engine. I got out of the cabin, feeling how I was shaking as if from the cold. The motel door was locked, but I knocked like crazy until I was finally let in. An old woman sat at the reception desk, her gaze was tired but attentive. I asked for a room, she nodded and handed over the key without saying a word. I could feel her eyes on me as I climbed the stairs. It was dark in the corridor, only one dim lantern flickered above the door of my room. I entered the room, closed the door and finally exhaled. I just wanted to fall on the bed and forget everything that happened. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw him again. I looked in the mirror, not believing my eyes. The man's face was there again. Now I could see him clearly. He was standing right behind me, his skin was pale, almost transparent, and his eyes, they were as black as a moonless night. Nuglari, nulaifi. I felt the air in the room grow heavy and the cold burn my skin. I don't remember how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear. Finally, my body broke out of this petrified state and I turned sharply. No one. An empty room. Only the sound of my own breathing, loud as the beating of drums in silence. I gripped the wall, trying to keep my balance. I was shaking, every nerve was tense like a string. I looked in the mirror again. The man was gone, but something had changed. The reflection looked dim, as if distorted. And then I saw the words that began to appear on the mirror surface. They were written as if by an invisible hand in long, bloody letters. "You will not escape." I jerked away from the mirror, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. What is it? Who is he? I have heard of mystical stories, but I never believed in such things. But here, in this dark room with the bloody words on the mirror, I was no longer sure that it was all just fiction. I hurriedly grabbed my truck keys and ran out of the room. The corridor was long and dark. The light above the door of my room continued to flicker. I heard footsteps behind me, quiet, barely noticeable, but they were there. Every step was difficult, as if the same man was chasing me. When I went down to the first floor, I saw that the old woman at the reception was no longer sitting there. Instead, there was a young man, too serious for his age. I approached him and asked where the old woman was. He looked at me in surprise. "What old woman? I'm here alone all evening." Now my thoughts started to get confused. "How so?" "I just saw her." The feeling of unreality of everything that was happening was becoming unbearable. But there was no time to think. I hurried to my truck as soon as I left the motel. The parking lot was empty. Only my truck stood there, enveloped in the fog that was coming in from all sides. I ran to the door of the cabin, feeling the cold seeping into my bones. But when I opened the door, I realized that someone was sitting inside. A dark figure in the passenger seat. I stopped, not knowing what to do. My legs refused to move. The figure slowly turned its head. She was looking at me. No eyes, no face. Only an empty darkness that seemed to absorb the whole world around it. I took a few steps back, almost losing my balance. There was only one thought in my head: to run away. But run away to where? Staying on this forgotten road, in the middle of the night, without transport, was not an option either. I gathered all my will into a fist and took a step forward. I don't know why, but I was sure I had to go back to the cockpit. Before I sat down, I pulled out my flashlight and shined it inside. No one. The seat is empty, my backpack is just as I left it. Maybe it's all just a game of my mind? I climbed in and locked the door, starting the engine. Although it could not calm me down, the sound of the motor seemed to bring me back to reality. I decided to move forward, leave the motel behind, and not stop until I reached some town. A few minutes later, my phone suddenly rang. The number was unfamiliar. I picked up the phone, hesitated a little, but still answered. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard a whisper, almost imperceptible. "They will come for you?" I instantly dropped my phone on the passenger seat like it burned my hand. The sound disappeared and I was about to throw it out the window when it rang again. The same number. The same incomprehensible fear. I felt something press against my chest, forcing me to breathe more often. I decided not to answer, but the phone kept ringing. I could see the screen glowing in the dark like a dim beacon in the fog and felt it was more than just a call. There was something on this road. Something that wanted to find me. I kept driving, keeping my eyes on the road ahead, but the phone kept ringing. The call became louder, unbearable, filling the entire cabin. My pulse jumped, my palms sweated. I couldn't resist and grabbed the phone, ready to answer. But instead of clicking the green button, I saw something on the screen. My reflection was on the screen. My own tired, tense physiognomy. I was looking at myself from my phone and there was darkness in my eyes. My hand twitched involuntarily and the phone fell from it, falling to the floor. I started to look at the road, trying to concentrate, but the feeling that someone was watching me was too strong. It seemed that even the truck that had served me for so long was now becoming alien and hostile. Suddenly, the headlights illuminated a figure in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes hard, the wheels squealed, the truck skidded on the asphalt. The figure did not move. I've seen his face before. It was the same man. He was standing right in front of me, his arms hanging unnaturally long again. His face was even paler, and now I could see that his lips were sewn together with a thick black thread. I broke into a cold sweat as he raised one hand and slowly pointed his finger to the side of the road. I couldn't move, as if something was holding me in place. He raised his finger again, his movements slow, as if he was trying to say something without words. I felt all my fear gather into one huge lump. Not knowing what to do, I sharply pressed the gas. The truck growled and rushed forward, but the man didn't even move. My car drove through it as if through a fog. I felt a strong cold draft, which was not present even on a windy day. The engine roared and I heard a thump. I braked and looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see him. But the road was empty. Only a thick fog covered everything around, hiding any traces of what had just happened. I tried to start the engine again, but it wouldn't even start. Just a short crack and then silence. I looked at the phone that was still lying on the floor. The screen went blank. I picked it up, feeling my hands shake. And again the number that called me earlier appeared on the screen. Now he didn't call, but I saw his incoming call, and the word, "Get out," was written. I could feel my mind start to go wild, like I was being pulled into a funnel of panic. I didn't know what to do, but something inside me compelled me to obey this command. I opened the door and stepped outside. It felt like I was entering a completely different world. It was quiet in the fog, too quiet. I looked around trying to figure out where the man wanted me to go. And then I saw it, an old gas station that stood on the side of the road, hidden in the thick shade of trees. She looked neglected, half broken. I approached her, although my every step was heavy as in a dream. There was a broken open sign on the door, and the windows were covered in dust and dirt. I opened the door, and it creaked so loudly that it seemed to me that the sound carried throughout the desert. It was dark and damp inside. Faint light filtered in through cracks in the walls, creating strange shadows that played on the floor. I walked further into the room until I heard a faint rustling. The heart beat faster. The sound came from behind the old counter. I quietly approached and looked behind her. There, in the corner, sat a man. His face was hidden under his hood, but I could feel his eyes following me. "You made a mistake," he said in a low, almost silent voice. "Now you're here and you can't go back." His words were like a blade piercing to the very heart. I took a step back, keeping my eyes on him. Who is he? Why is he here? And why did I end up in this cursed place? I felt everything in my chest tighten from unknown fear. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. He did not answer, but slowly raised his head. His face was similar to the face of the man I saw on the road, only this time his eyes were red as hot coals. He looked at me as if he knew everything about me, about my fears, my doubts. "You can't escape," he repeated. "They already know about you." The room became even darker, as if the shadow itself began to thicken around me. I felt the cold seeping into my bones. I realized that I had to get out of here somehow, but how? Something about this place held me. I turned to the exit, trying to find my way back, but the door I came through was gone, as if they never existed. Now I stood in total darkness. Only the man's red eyes shone in the distance like lights in a night forest. I could hear their voices, soft whispers that filled the room, becoming a chorus that grew louder and louder. They sang that I would never leave this place, that I belonged to them, that I had become a part of them. And then, when it seemed that I was about to go crazy, I heard a scream that broke the silence. It was my own cry, but I couldn't control myself anymore. Other figures appeared from the darkness. There were more of them. They were getting closer to me, and each of them had the same red eyes. The darkness that enveloped me seemed to become alive. I tried to step back, but it was difficult to walk. My feet felt like they were stuck in something sticky. Figures with red eyes were approaching. Their movements were smooth but completely silent. They stretched out their hands to me, and I saw how their fingers, like long, thin branches, began to stretch slowly in my direction. I felt my heart begin to beat faster, as if trying to escape from my chest. There was only one command in his head: to run away. But where? The room was locked and the exit was gone. I realized that I was faced with a choice: to stay and wait for the inevitable, or to try to find at least some way to escape. I looked at the walls for any opportunity. To my left I saw a small window through which the light barely filtered through. It looked big enough to crawl through. I rushed towards him with determination and almost touched the frame when I felt someone's hand grab my shoulder. Her touch was as cold as ice. I jerked away and almost lost my balance, but quickly recovered and broke the glass with my elbow. Pieces of glass flew in all directions, some of them cut my skin, but I didn't care. I grabbed onto the frame, trying to climb out as quickly as possible. I felt blood drain from my fingers, but the fear of what was left in the room made me move on. When I finally got out, I found myself in a dense forest. The fog that covered the road before was now even thicker, like milk. He passed between the trees, creating the illusion that I was not in the real world, but in some kind of nightmare. He started running. The steps became more and more difficult, but I did not stop. Behind me I heard a whisper, as if someone was softly calling my name, but I didn't look back. I knew that if I stopped or looked back, it would all be over. The feeling was as if the forest stretched without end. There was no landmark around, only trees that looked the same, like an endless maze. I didn't know how long I ran until I finally saw something strange in front of me, an old wooden hut. She was standing among the trees, half immersed in the fog, but the light was coming from her. I hesitated for a moment, and then decided that it was better to take a risk and find shelter than to remain in the open forest. I went to the door, which was half open, and pushed it inside. The hut was old, neglected, but there was a candle burning inside. There were papers on the table, scattered around as if someone had left the place in a hurry. I closed the door inside. For a moment it seemed that I had found at least some safety. Approaching the table, I took one of the sheets of paper. Some strange symbols were written on it, like some signs or drawings made with black paint. But then there was something else. I saw my name. No, it couldn't be. My name was written over and over on each sheet. My head was spinning. Who did it? How did they know I would be here? And then I heard a voice, calm and quiet. I told you, you won't be able to escape. I turned sharply and saw a man standing in the corner of the room. The same man from the road. His eyes were no longer red, they were now just pitch black. He slowly raised his hand and pointed to something behind me. I turned my head and saw a window behind which there was only darkness. But shadows appeared in this darkness. They were getting closer and closer, and I realized that they were the same figures with red eyes. They approached the hut, surrounding it from all sides. I looked at the man again and he smiled. It was a terrifying smile that made my blood run cold. I didn't know what to do. Then he said quietly, "This is just the beginning. They are already here and they don't need a door to enter." The walls of the hut began to shake as if an earthquake had hit them. The candlelight flickered on and off, plunging the room into almost complete darkness. I rushed to the window, hoping to find another escape route, but the shadows were already very close, as if hanging over the glass, their red eyes shining in the darkness. A man from the corner of the room came closer, his face ominously calm. "You can't run forever," he said. "They already know about you. They always knew." I felt the ground begin to sink under my feet, as if I was standing on thin ice. The floor shook beneath my feet and I fell, losing my balance. He hit his head on the edge of the table, the world before his eyes became blurred. All I heard was a muffled laugh. My world was spinning in the dark, and the muffled laughter was getting closer. My head was foggy, the pain spread through my skull, but I knew I couldn't just give up. I have to pull myself together and find a way out. All instincts screamed that to stop is death. I grabbed the edge of the table with my hands, trying to get up. My legs were shaking, but I gathered all my strength to stand on the level. My consciousness was still half conscious, but I could see that the shadows had approached the hut almost at close quarters. Their red eyes glowed in the darkness, and I heard their whispers change to something more ominous, like they were chanting a spell. The man with the black eyes was still standing in the corner of the room. He watched me with a faint smile. I could see his fingers drumming slowly on his thigh as if he was expecting something. I realized that he was enjoying my fear, that he was somehow controlling these shadows, summoning them behind my back. I took a step towards him. "What do you need from me?" I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "It's not me who needs anything," he replied calmly, his voice sounding like a cold wind in a snowy forest. "It's them. And they already found you." "Who are they?" I shouted, feeling the desperation rise inside me. "They've always been here," he said. "This is their road, their forest, their places. They were here before us and they will be here after us. Sometimes they take people like you who shouldn't be here." I realized that it was useless to try to get answers from him. He was only a guide in this nightmare, not its creator. I turned away from him and started looking for any way to get out. Then I noticed that the floor where I was standing began to look like old rotten boards, and one of them was cracked. I instantly bent down and began to pull out the debris, raking it out with my hands. Below them I saw a narrow hatch. It was the only way out. I grabbed the handle and yanked hard. The hatch creaked and I was able to pick it up. Below him were stairs leading down into the darkness. I didn't know where they were leading, but the shadows from outside were already starting to seep through the walls of the hut, and I didn't have time to think. I went down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The noise behind me died down, but I felt that those creatures had not left me. They were still here somewhere in the darkness, following my every move. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, a long, narrow tunnel opened up in front of me, completely shrouded in darkness. Only the faint echo of my breathing bounced off the walls. I took a lighter out of my pocket and lit it. A weak light illuminated the walls, covered with strange signs, the same as the papers in the hut. They stretched along the entire tunnel as if warning me about something. I moved forward, listening for every sound. Every step sounded too loudly in this sepulchral silence. The further I walked, the more I felt the air getting colder. It was as if with each meter I entered deeper and deeper into some unnatural bowels. Suddenly I heard heavy footsteps behind me. He turned around, no one. But I knew it wasn't my imagination. Someone or something was moving behind me. I quickened my steps, trying to hold the lighter so that it lit as much light as possible. The walls of the tunnel became narrower, dampness seeped through the stones. And then, when I had almost given up hope of finding a way out, I saw a faint flicker of light ahead. It was like a candle burning at the end of the tunnel. I rushed there, hoping to find at least some answer or get out of here alive. As I got closer, the light grew brighter. I saw that it came out of a large stone room. I stepped into it and froze. People were standing inside. They were dressed in ancient cloaks, their faces hidden by hoods. They stood in a circle around the fire burning in the center of the room. They didn't move, didn't say a word, but their presence was felt, as if they were waiting for me. One of them raised his head. I saw his eyes, the same red eyes I had seen in those figures. He spoke quietly but clearly. "You came. We knew you would come. Now is the time to make a choice." His words echoed in my head. I stood motionless, not understanding what was happening. All these people, all these strange symbols and the darkness around, all mixed up in the chaos of my thoughts. But I knew they weren't just waiting for me. They were waiting for my decision. "I don't understand what you want from me," I said, trying to stay calm even though my heart was beating like crazy. "Choice," repeated the same voice. "The choice between darkness and light. But remember that light can be deceptive, and darkness is always true." I looked at their faces, hidden under the hoods, and I understood that I did not have much time to think. Something in the back of my mind told me that I was on the verge of something very important. That my choice, no matter what it is, will change everything. "What happens if I choose wrongly?" I asked. "There is no wrong choice," answered the voice. "There are only consequences. And you yourself will choose which of them to live with." I took a step forward, feeling the air in the room grow heavier. My mind, confused and disturbed, tried to find at least some way out of this hopeless situation. The cloaked figures surrounding me stood motionless like stone statues. Their red eyes continued to gaze into the darkness, and I could feel their gazes on me, which seemed to pierce right through me. The voice in my head sounded louder and louder. "Choice? Choice." I stopped in front of the man who was talking to me. His hood slid back a little and I saw a young, almost childlike face beneath it. But the eyes were old, filled with something so ancient and wise that it inspired fear and respect at the same time. "I choose." I began, but I didn't know what I was going to say. The light in the center of the room flickered and the shadows around me began to move faster, gathering momentum like a whirlwind. I felt them approach, cold as an icy wind, penetrating me, making my thoughts cloud. They whispered, their voices blending into one great roar. "Light or dark?" I gathered all my strength and shouted, "I choose life." At that moment, the fire in the center of the room flared up more brightly, and everything around exploded in a blinding glow. I closed my eyes, covering my face with my hands. The feeling was as if I was torn from this place and thrown into an abyss. I was falling and time seemed to stand still. Suddenly the light disappeared and I fell onto something hard. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the asphalt, right in the middle of the same road where it all started. The night was clear, the stars shone brightly in the sky, and the moon hung high overhead, illuminating my truck parked nearby. I got up, still not believing that it was all real. My head was throbbing with pain, and there were scratches on my hands from broken glass. But I was alive. I was standing on the road where it all began, but something had changed. Everything around seemed unusually quiet and peaceful. I approached the truck, afraid that something might be wrong. The door was open as I had left it, but when I climbed in I noticed that the radio was on and a familiar tune was playing softly. A melody from my childhood. I smiled and for the first time in a while I felt calm. Started the engine and the truck growled as before. I pulled into the road and moved forward without looking back. The road was empty, but now I felt that I was no longer alone. Something inside me changed, as if I had left a part of me in that forest in the darkness. And while I was driving, I kept hearing the same voice in my head. "You made your choice. You chose life. But remember that darkness is always nearby. She's just waiting for her moment." I smiled and hit the gas, feeling the wind brush my face. The darkness no longer seemed so scary to me. She will always be there, but I'm not afraid anymore. I broke out of her arms and knew that I would drive on because the road is my life. The light of the headlights illuminated the path ahead, and I felt that the night no longer had power over me. Now I knew I was stronger than her. The darkness has been defeated, but it is always somewhere nearby, waiting. Thanks for following this story. I hope she left you with a sense of intrigue and a little fear. If you want even more scary stories, I'm always here.